So there's six skills that I would recommend anybody who's interested in becoming, a more effective leader intentionally seek out and sort of develop into their training. And I don't think these are skills that you get by going to an MBA program. I think that they
Mm.
are an intentionality that you bring to your day-to-day job.
I often get asked if leadership really matters, if it makes any difference at all. I mean, if a company has a good product, good operations, then are you really going to see a difference in the success or failure of a company? Google had a whole research project where they tried to see if they could get rid of managers in their organization. And all of that question is why I am so excited for our guest today, Justus Kilian. Justus is a good friend of mine. We actually co host another podcast together. But more importantly, he is a partner at Space Capital, a seed stage investment firm that focuses on space and space adjacent startups. He and his partners are literally betting on whether or not a company is going to be successful. And according to him, leadership plays a big part in this. So in today's conversation, we're going to break down some of the leadership styles, leadership traits that Justus looks at when he's evaluating founders who come in. And then, of course, we're going to expand this conversation so that it doesn't just apply to founders of startups, but to every leader at every level, all the way down to frontline managers and supervisors. If this is your first time listening to the Leadership Launchpad, please make sure you subscribe so you never miss a future episode. And if you happen to be someone who's responsible for developing leaders in your organization, I would love to talk to you. Please reach out through Matt at bettereverydaystudios.com so we can have a conversation about how we can make your leaders better. With that, let's get into the conversation with Justus Kilian. Justus, welcome to the Leadership Launchpad. How are you doing today, my friend?
Doing great. So excited to be here. I love listening to your podcast. It has brought so much, sort of unique insight into my world, even as a venture investor. Love what you're doing. So excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this discussion. We've talked about it a couple times because I think, we live in a world, especially in the engineering world, I think where leadership management can often in many ways be called into question. I think we see this time and again where there's been efforts at Google to like remove managers, and then we just kind of went through a big thing of removing middle managers, and there's just a lot of different discussion about where leaders matter, what kind of leadership experience matters. And that's why I was really excited to talk to you because I know from your role as a venture capital firm, you're looking at companies, you're looking at individuals and deciding who to invest in. And it sounds like, there are very specific leadership qualities or maybe leadership experiences that you're looking for that have an impact. So I think I'd start there. Like when you're looking at a leadership team of a company, what are, some of the major types of experiences that you're looking for?
Sure. Yeah, let's dive into that. I mean, I would argue that the primary responsibility of my job looking at very early stage companies is really about leadership assessment.
Hmm.
Who are these folks? What have they done? What is their latent potential? How do you unlock that latent potential by surrounding themselves with great partners, great team, and taking on some big, bold, ambitious idea? And so, there are certainly some patterns over the years that I think that certainly stand out, but a lot of what I'm looking for are traits in the CEO specifically, but also more broadly across the founding team. And I think the first one that stands out, and I think you often hear, is this unreasonable persistence. Somebody who will find a solution regardless of what the challenge is. A couple the others are probably a little bit less discussed. I'm really looking for somebody that is magnetic. You need one, like the problem that they're working on, why they're focused on it, their work that they do. It attracts people. It has this attracting force, and people want to be a part of that. People want to be close to this person, their leadership. And So that magnetic trait, I think, is something that is really important, and there's a number of facets that I think can sort of help shape that. I'm also looking for somebody that has a sense of morality, and when I say that, it's not necessarily this is right or this is wrong, but more of a sense of I have a purpose in life because of something. Like I am working towards some sort of greater good, some sort of greater, longer achievement, some sort of legacy, and this company, this problem is my mission. And I think that that is a real, a bit, it creates an ability to sort of clarify and weed out in really tough situations. Another is
I'd love
being,
to. I'd actually love to pause you there on those first three
yeah.
because I have to draw a parallel with something that I talk about a lot. You know, I talk with a lot of teams about trust and leaders about the importance of building trust. And the model of trust that we use, that is kind of a well-known model, breaks down into three basic components of the, you know, you trust someone if you know that if you believe they can get things done, if you believe they do the right thing, and if you believe they care about you. And just as I was hearing you say, you know, like they have this tenacity and persistence, they have the ability to get things done. You know, they have this magnetic personality that can draw people to them, probably because they're showing people that they care about them. And then they have kind of this idea of this somewhat of a morality of they are going to be doing the right things. Is just an interesting, just as you laid out those first three, they fit so well in this model of the things that get you to trust someone, and often probably why they are traits of a strong leader is because ultimately, like you need a lot of people to trust the leader if you're going to build an effective team.
Absolutely. I think that's a brilliant framework and aligns very closely. Yeah. So
Yeah.
the next two that are, I was going to highlight are, I think, maybe just an extension of maybe that summary, maybe even unnecessary. The next one is, somebody who's really adaptive. The nature of a startup is having a hypothesis, testing it, and iterating. So not being too stuck in any one sort of belief or view or sort of understanding, and the ability to incorporate feedback and iterate. So that one's pretty well understood. And then the last one, which just highlighted as a part of that framework, is really being effective. And being effective is saying that you're going to do something, actually being able to achieve it. That aligns with the persistence, sort of the relentless pursuit of getting to that outcome. But it also aligns with the ability to distill complex ideas so other people can understand them in a simple way, so you can align goals within an organization, so you can get teams to row in the same direction. And it also requires storytelling to help people see a bigger purpose, a higher meaning in the work beyond just the tasks and the goals. So I save that one for last because I think being effective is ultimately the most important thing, but you have these other traits that sort of support and reinforce it.
Yeah, I'd love to kind of dig into that last one a little bit because it's something interesting that I'm seeing right now. Is actually on a call with a HR leader in a technical company recently, in a software company, and they were saying how they're starting to get worried about their pipeline of engineering leadership because so few leaders want to go into leadership. They just want to stay as individual contributors. And we obviously live in a world where I think there's a constant story of who should be in charge, right? Of is it the technical person that gets promoted and the technical person leads everything, or is it more the business person or the person with the MBA or whatever? And you have stories, you know, like at Apple where a marketing person comes in, takes over for Steve Jobs, and the company doesn't go anywhere. So then Steve Jobs has to come in and kind of rescue the company. From your perspective, when it comes to that idea of like distilling ideas down and storytelling, yeah, there's a couple of different questions I could have there of like how rare is it for the technical leader to be able to do that? And then also, is it okay to have like the technical leader and more of maybe they're not good at the storytelling, so you have somebody else that's more of the storyteller, but they maybe understand less of the technical stuff.
It's an interesting question. In my experience, the technical leader often lacks at that ability to distill complex ideas down into a simple outcome. And in
Hmm.
particular, tell that story to sort of multiple key stakeholders.
Hmm.
Often when you're coming from an engineering background, you're thinking about optimization and efficiency and performance. But when you're coming from a business mindset and an investor mindset, the things that
Hmm.
matter are sales, units sold, ultimately, your return on investment. And so it's two, like, business versus engineering, it's two fundamentally different ways to see the world. And I would say that sort of a business foundation gives you a little bit broader aperture to communicate the critical thing, critical operations, critical direction of the business versus engineering principles. But I don't think that it's limited to business folks. I mean, I definitely think it
Sure.
is something you can hone and develop over time. And it is something that you sort of intentionally have to seek out and work on, and it can be developed.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So those are some of the, the traits that you're looking for in leaders. Are there any red flags that, other than just like the absence of those traits? Like, what are some of the red flags that you're watching out for?
Yeah, so red flags that I often see. So this is particular to the CEO level.
Okay.
So we'll sort of touch on that, and then we can maybe go to like more common early leadership pitfalls.
Yeah.
Sort of at that founder level, oftentimes what we see is somebody who's had experience in a lab or a technical role, but hasn't been able to step out into some sort of broader leadership opportunity. And brilliant engineer found, a technical solution to, a big problem, but has had limited experience leading a team, maybe only the team within the lab. And so, they haven't demonstrated that ability to step out. It doesn't mean it's impossible. It's just a question of concern, right? It hasn't been demonstrated periods of time in well-resourced corporate environments, that ability to cross over from an abundant environment to a resource-constrained environment, it really is a fundamentally different way of thinking. And there's a lot of great psychology on sort of scarcity and how our brain
Yeah.
changes when we're in a scarce
Yeah.
environment.
Yeah.
And I'd highly recommend anybody who's interested in sort of innovation to spend a little bit of time thinking about that. There's some great books. I think one's actually called Scarcity. And our brain fundamentally changes when we get into that environment, and it forces us to sort of get creative and find new outcomes. So never experiencing that can set you up for a challenging future as like a founder or CEO in a resource constrained environment.
Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely. There's a lot of examples where I've seen that in the past. Of the one that always comes to mind to me, since it's so core to my career of being in the military and being exposed to the military so much. But I think the military tends to, since there's just people everywhere, like people and time are viewed as like this infinite resource, and it just changes the kinds of solutions that you even think of so often, which is definitely a challenge I see. But as you said, so you're seeing this from kind of like the CEO level or the founder level from the very top. But I think there's a lot of lessons that can be learned at the lower level if you're thinking about as a new or mid-level manager, whether you want to just be all the more successful in your team. I think a lot of the same traits can apply. Or you're thinking, maybe I want to be a founder one day. What are some of the experiences that I want to make sure I have? It sounded like you have some examples of applying this to kind of like the real world inside an organization.
Yeah, so there's six skills that I would recommend anybody who's interested in becoming, a more effective leader intentionally seek out and sort of develop into their training. And I don't think these are skills that you get by going to an MBA program. I think that they
Mm,
are an intentionality that you bring to your day-to-day job. And it is the practice, the behaviors that you're sort of seeking out, and it's through repetition of practicing these things that you develop the skills over a long period of time. And
love that.
they then develop into the traits that we started out with. So I think the first one is developing some experience working with across functions. So the ability to understand what other teams do, see, if you're an individual contributor on the electrical engineering team, the ability to understand and see how what you're contributing fits into the bigger whole of the system, and then potentially even the bigger whole of the business.
Yeah.
That's critical for motivation, communication, sort of understanding how the pieces fit together. And there's opportunity in there to, by building relationships with other teams, to understand some of the problems they're facing, bring your unique perspective into a potential problem that they're facing, and help foster new relationships, build your skills, see things from a different perspective. I think when we look back at some of the biggest breakthroughs in research and development over the last 100 years, oftentimes they were from people who went very deep in their specialization. But more and more, we're starting to have breakthroughs and insights that come from sort of a multidisciplinary expertise. So somebody who had a deep understanding in physics, but then came into the financial markets and realized that a skill or a technology or a framework was applicable in this type of environment. It sort of unlocked
Absolutely.
a new breakthrough. So that's something that people can start practicing immediately, seeking out those opportunities.
I love it. Yeah, and it's so true. The things that you see of it's providing that new frame. It's trying to bring that new frame to mind. And so I think one, it's seeking those opportunities, looking for ways that you can work with other people, but then as part of that, actively seeking ways to bring this new understanding that you have into that field, or to understand what things from this other field or this other part of the company that you can apply to your own work. It's actively trying to connect those lines and draw new conclusions. I think that allows you to, whether you want to be a founder or not, it just helps you be more successful and more effective.
Absolutely. And I think, the key part of this experience or cross-functional nature is you're stretching yourself a little bit, right? You're things from a different perspective. And beyond work, there's ways to do that in your personal life, like the ability to, traveling, both, domestic or international, are these little periods that stretch the way you think and see the
Yeah.
world and force you to sort of open up your mind a little bit. And so there's a lot of ways you can create it, but it is that idea of stretching yourself and changing your frame of reference a little bit.
Yeah.
Um,
I love it. Okay. What's the
so
next
the
one?
next one is really around first principles thinking. So SpaceX has been incredible at this. I think really bringing it back into sort of the mainstream and engine, the mainstream conversation. But when it comes from an investor standpoint, oftentimes when I'm approaching conversations, with the leaders of a company, how they think about a problem and how they sort of reason through the challenges is often more important than specifically what they know about that problem. And
Mm,
it is important that they have people on the team that could be the guardrails. Like that doesn't work, but it really is about the process of asking why and this inquisitive nature and really getting down to the core foundations of the problem and sort of removing all the assumptions that we bring into it. And if you haven't done this and practice it frequently, it's crazy how many assumptions we bring to the thoughts, the positions, the comments that
yeah.
we have. And I think it's really just goes to the nature of our brain. These heuristics and sort of assumptions help us make decisions more quickly, but they prevent us from seeing the fundamental nature of the challenge that we're facing.
I'd be interested. What are some ways that whether it's you yourself or you've seen other people practice that? Because first, as you said, like first principles is a phrase that's
Yeah.
become very popular recently. And I think most of us can kind of get an intuitive understanding of it, but it's really easy to just say like, "Oh yeah, I do that," without really digging into it. I don't know. Have you ever seen any ways that people can practice that for themselves?
I think the simplest way you can do it is just ask why and go maybe 2 or 3 layers deeper when a
Mm,
problem presents itself. That's the simplest way to do it. And you can do that from an engineering standpoint, you can do it from a business standpoint. But just like that simple question of why is this, problem showing up? Why are we thinking about it in this way? You know, it'll lead you to a much greater clarity if you just hit pause and ask that question 2 or 3 times to peel back some of the layers of the onion. I think it's that
yeah.
simple.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And already I'm sure you see this, some of these experiences are building off of one another because very often it's those cross-functional experiences of widening the aperture a little bit that allow you to ask those why questions in a deeper
Mm,
way and can provide you new answers.
that's right. That's right.
Awesome. Okay. So we got
Um,
two down. What's next?
the next skill is something that I think takes a lifetime to develop, and I think the best CEOs do it very, very effectively. I think there's a lot of CEOs that don't really grasp this concept. So it's the idea of adaptive heat management. And it requires actually quite a bit of empathy to understand the team, where the stress levels are at, where the motivation is at, and increase stress or increase pressure by tightening deadlines, by gaps in where there's performance, or when the temperature, the pressure is too high, the ability to create space, hit pause, give team members and colleagues the ability, the moment to relax, reflect, see what the challenge is, and actually sort of manage the temperature of the organization. And if you turn that up to 11 and just run, the whole team, the whole company at that threshold, you're going to get burnout. You're going to get people that aren't able to achieve what they want. Just driving hard does not create the outcomes you want. You want to be able to think critically about what you're doing. You want to see this pattern recognition across, multiple different organizations and solve problems in a important and creative way. Tight timelines and just putting pressure on people is going to force them into those heuristics and sort of that those assumptions to make decisions quickly just to be able to move on, just to meet deadlines. So managing that adaptive heat is a challenging skill, and I think it's important for leaders. There is some framework out there. Harvard has actually done sort of this whole. They've published papers on this called adaptive leadership. If you want to go deeper on it, but I think it's a skill that you hone, and just being aware that it is something that you can influence, both as a team member and as a manager, is actually an incredibly empowering skill to have.
Yeah, it's one of the number one reasons why I think, though you can't do it right away, it is important as a leader to create a team where people are bringing at least some of their outside self into work, in the sense that you need to, ideally, you want to be aware of the stresses that are happening around them, because work isn't happening in a vacuum. And upping the pressure a little bit this week might be fine because they're motivated, they're well rested, and they're excited. And then the next week, somebody has a sick kid, they got a bad night's sleep, whatever, and that's enough so that that heat map changes, where it goes from, eustress, which is like the positive version of stress, where eustress is what pushes you to achieve more, and it flips it into distress, where
Yeah,
now it's actually harming your creativity, it's making you feel burnt out. And so that's finding the right ways to understand, pick up on those signals from people, understand what's happening in their broader lives, so that you know how to push and pull those levers.
that's right. Yep.
Yeah. Excellent.
So just a couple more.
Yeah.
The ability to ask for help and creating that as a habit. One of the challenges I often see with CEOs when they're working with the board or with young leaders that are developing and maturing is this sort of feedback fragility. Taking information and feedback on yourself, your actions as attacks and becoming defensive or dismissive. And that really, goes to the heart of this idea of being able to be adaptive. If you can't hear the feedback on how you hone yourself, it's going to be very, very difficult to be effective. And so it's critical. It's something we can all practice. Our innate response when we hear feedback is always going to be something of, it will create a fight or flight mentality. You'll be on your heels when it comes up. And it's those people who are conscious of it that can then put that sort of innate, response mechanism down and hear and listen and be able to adapt. Those are the people that are really going to differentiate themselves and become really effective leaders.
And it's such a hard one for especially new leaders, because when you become a leader, when you become a manager for the first time, so often there's a little bit of imposter syndrome. There's a little bit of like the belief that as a leader, you're supposed to have the answers. And so you're just constantly trying to prove yourself by talking over people, by providing the answers, by trying to be the one who's right. And it always results in having the opposite effect. Like, it makes you seem less confident, less capable, and it's preventing you from receiving that feedback and actually getting better. This is probably one that like you said, most commonly see, that can be super easy to fix if you can just realize it and get past it and just start asking those questions and having that curiosity. Yeah,
I
I
don't
think
think I don't
totally
think
agree with
the
that.
onus is purely on the individual to figure out how to
Okay.
do that. I actually do
Yeah.
think that leaders in organizations have the opportunity to demonstrate that behavior
Yes.
by asking for help when they need it, right? That's why I call it this ask for help habit. And if you demonstrate, that you don't have all the answers, you turn to people, you're looking for feedback, it opens the door for others to be willing to give that feedback. And so I think this is really important. It also
And
depends if it's a cultural thing.
yeah, and that's why I'm sure, for switching back to kind of the top level perspective, your perspective of looking at the CEO, I'm sure if you're having a founding team or a founding member that's just very just like, no, we're right, we can't accept feedback, then you would expect that they're going to create a culture that's like that. And that's just not going to be an effective culture.
For founders, they have a tough road because investors, we all think that we're the smartest people in the room. And so every investor you talk to, they're going to give you their perspective. They're going to tell you how you should do things. The founder has to have the ability to like parse through the high quality feedback and determine what really to incorporate. And I think, their ability to trust their gut and hone their skills and knowledge to understand what is good feedback, is sort of like a
Hmm.
higher level,
I
that
like
sort
that.
of
Yeah,
habit that you can develop over time. But
I like
yeah,
that.
if you're having a conversation and there's the founder and there's just a lack of receptiveness or willing to engage in any feedback or critique, it's a major red flag, and it creates a lot of tension at the board when that type of situation happens.
Yeah, awesome.
So two more,
Okay.
thriving under constraints. I think this is super important for today in sort of modern venture when founders are coming to market looking to raise, $10 million out of the gate. Investors are creating a situation where there are not constraints when you need those constraints at the earliest days for an organization to really force highest priority decision, highest priority hires, highest priority needs in the company. And within those constraints, it is really where step changes, breakthroughs happen. There's been multiple times across our portfolio when, in the height of COVID-19, when operations had to change, founding teams had to go back and rethink their whole business model, their whole tech stack, that led to a breakthrough. Even more recently, with advancements in AI, team members on the engineering team, there were some tensions on the team with the engineering leadership. They were able to cut back some of the team members and create leverage using some of these new models that allowed them to go farther, do more, and be more effective at their work. And so
Mhm.
it is those moments of challenge and constraint that really sort of push us to find a unique solution. And great founders enjoy being put in that environment. I would say great
Yeah.
leaders enjoy being put in that environment. And I think you can't really know who you are and sort of what you stand for until you're put in one of those pressure cooker constraining moments. There's probably
Yeah.
a lot of lessons, I think, from service and military that would validate that as well. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that one?
No, I definitely do because I think one of the simplest examples of this, especially for frontline or mid-level leaders in growing companies, is we so often just look at headcount as the answer to everything, and a lot of new managers get sucked into the belief that like they're better. Like the proof that they are a good leader is that they have a ever increasing size of team underneath them, which leads you to not look for those innovative solutions, to not figure out how you can decide what not to do or how to do things more efficiently because you just assume you can always like get more people. And it's one of the simplest ways to just say no, like this is we're going to try to solve this problem. This is how many people we have because you have the Netflix is the famous example of very earlier in their history where they were going through some problems and the dot-com bubble burst and they laid off a bunch of people and they were suddenly just thinking like, well, this is so much better. This is incredible. And there's lots of other reasons for that, but certainly that constraint of headcount, constraint of time, constraint of funding is such a huge driver.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So
Okay,
the
one more.
one more to hit on. So developing some negotiation scar tissue. Everything that we do is an act of selling and negotiating. It requires an ability to understand a situation, see the critical factors that are on the table, think creatively what motivates the other party, what their needs are, and find some sort of common ground to be able to get to an effective or desired outcome. It's
Hmm.
so important. And so, you really don't want to be a leader or a founder coming into that role and never had any sort of intentional practice at negotiations. And there's entire curriculums in this. MBA programs do have classes on negotiation. Talk to your lawyer friends about, what an effective negotiation looks like. But there are systems and frameworks to actually force you into a proactive approach to manage negotiations that do
Hmm.
consistently create better outcomes. And it's a skill, amongst all of these other skills, they actually feed into each other. And negotiation is often sort of the centerpiece by which, an effective outcome comes from. And so the ability to
Yeah.
empathize with the other party, to understand where they're coming from, to be able to turn up the heat and put pressure when needed or turn that down in a negotiation, all of them sort of converge at that moment. And it can be it is a really important skill set to have that I think is underappreciated just generally in business and leadership.
Where do you see that as a skill? Yeah, what are some examples that you can think of that coming up kind of in day-to-day life, like in the middle of a company? Because you say negotiation initially, and it's like, okay, you're negotiating a funding round or you're negotiating equity, but that's not, there's a very small slice of people that ever get affected in that
That's
way.
right.
What are some examples that you can see of making this like real?
I think anytime you are going through a job search or negotiating,
Yep,
right? And it should be a two-way dialogue, you trying to
yep,
understand what the needs of the company are, understanding what the ranges of possible salary and equity comp are, and trying to maximize your position in that situation while not removing yourself out of the opportunity, the candidate pool. And so, that will show up many times in your career as you're seeking new
yep,
jobs. I think it happens also when you're looking at college or graduate school applications. You're going through essentially an interview process, which is also a bit of a negotiation, right? You're
yep,
selling your skill sets, you're selling your experience, you're selling you and trying to find out why you would be the right fit into that university, that program, that
yep,
professor, that lab. And so it is a negotiation, like you're trying to position and close yourself as the right candidate for that opportunity.
yeah.
Those are just some of the most immediate, but this
Hmm.
is also going to come up after you've been hired. You're looking to take on more responsibility, you want to become a manager. Usually you're needing to make an effective case, to your boss or to the leaders, about why you should move up and how you do that. Folks don't just promote in their career just by hitting the day-to-day goals. They see the higher order effects within the organization. They manage towards those opportunities. They communicate those things clearly, and then it all sort of boils down into a negotiation where you ask for that role or proactively seek it out.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I just love this idea of negotiation too. The thing that comes to mind for me is as a hiring manager, too often the mistake that hiring managers make is believing that they have all the power, that it's not a negotiation. It's just, I
Mm,
have the job, you want it, let's go. Take it or leave it. When really it should be viewed as, no, this is a two-way decision that you're trying to come to the right conclusion on. Just another example that came to mind of how this constantly plays out. These are fantastic, I think. And, again, just to emphasize this point that though you are so often looking at the leadership level, the top leadership level of an organization, these are principles that apply if you want to be a better leader at any stage of an organization, whether or not you yourself want to become, a founder. Which is this has been a fantastic discussion, Justice. Thank you so much.
absolutely. It's a ton of fun. And you can go and do these things now. You don't have to wait for the opportunity. It really sits with you to sort of apply it and go seek out these opportunities and develop the muscle and turn them into critical traits that are in your skill set.
Absolutely. Well, Justice, thank you so much. If people want to find out more about your Space Capital, where should they go?
LinkedIn, you can block office hours with me. I have part of my schedule that's open to individuals for conversation that are thinking about leadership journey, that are recruiting great people within their organization, that are thinking about forming companies. I love to have those conversations one on one and get to know folks that are on this journey and potentially interested in venture and space technology. So LinkedIn's the best way to hit me up. I also run a platform called Space Talent in addition to my investing work, and it's a free resource that we make available. We highlight a number of folks across the ecosystem and share some of their leadership lessons and their career journey as practical insights. There's a job board there. There's an active community there to help you build and expand your network. Hopefully these are helpful tools, and I would love to connect if anything I said resonates with you and you're interested in the venture journey.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you so much for listening to today's show. If you are looking for help turning your organization's great engineers into great managers, me and my team at Better Everyday Studios would love to help. We deliver targeted and interactive training workshops that are designed to help build the 3 fundamental skills of any new manager: building trust, giving feedback, and setting goals. Reach out to me through matt@bettereverydaystudios.com so we can start making your organization better every day.